Okay, so this is going to be a short presentation on how to make a presentation. So hopefully you'll be able to improve the clarity of what you're trying to get across during this presentation, and hopefully you can reflect on some of the stuff that you've done previously and see how that can be improved in the future. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to give a quick overview. So this is something that presentations don't have to have. You can skip this, but here I'm just going to say that I'm going to provide a list of things that are going to be in the talk. So there's going to be a section on planning, there's going to be a section on audience and time, structure, flow, this concept of the red line, and then I'm going to give some practical advice about what should and shouldn't be in slides to make the presentation as clear as possible. Now, your presentation might not have to have a list like this that shows what's going to be in it, especially if it's a short talk. You might want to get stuck in straight away, go from your title slide to something that says, this is why I'm doing it. This is what I'm doing, rather than have an intro that like this that sets out what's going to be in the talk. So you have to plan what's going to be in your presentation, and it's a good idea to do this beforehand, before you start actually writing the slides, to give you an idea of what slides you're going to do, why, and think about why you're going to do each slide. So this is an example of maybe a planning exercise that you might do if you're going to summarize a paper. You might want to summarize why the research in the paper is done, why is it important, what has motivated the researchers to do it, what have they actually done, okay, what are their main findings, and how have they done that. Okay, so you might want to list a few key methods, some key findings for what, some key motivations for why, and make a note of those about which are the key points that you need to make to make the argument that this was a good piece of research, or this is a this. Make sure that you have all of the key points down, so you don't make slides for stuff that's not important, doesn't important for getting your message across. While you're doing that, you should obviously think about the audience that you're going to give this talk to. So if you don't want to bamboozle an audience, that say if you're giving a talk to the general public, you might want to remove quite a lot of the technical information. That's not to say that you don't have to take all of the technical information out altogether. You can keep stuff in, but just not explain it. In a short talk, you can gloss over quite a lot of the details and just accept that people aren't going to understand the details, as long as the main message of each kind of thing gets across. Likewise, you don't want to be boring people with stuff they already know. So it's important to have an understanding of what your audience will be when you're writing the talk. And similarly, you don't want to be rushing through the talks. You want to be really focusing on the key things, so you don't have to waste time on stuff that you're not it's not important for your message. So you want to think about timing as well as the audience at the planning and preparation stage. Okay, so you also want to think about the structure and flow of the talk. Now, most people kind of get this right, that you want to start your talk at the beginning and you want to finish the talk at the end. And in between, you want to have a series of sections or slides that lead from one to the other. So, for instance, going for an introduction, why is this an important piece of research? What is the key problem that's being answered by this research? And then go through a logical step of things, going through methods, data, interpretation, and then the conclusions. So you don't have to follow this rigid structure. For instance, maybe start by introducing the conclusions, okay, which kind of gives people an idea where the talk is going, okay, so they understand, have some idea about what are the main points you're trying to make, okay, through each of the subsequent slides, and then reiterate your initial conclusions at the end. It's a little bit like an abstract of a talk. You can kind of give the abstract at the beginning, and then the conclusions at the end again. The key thing is that the logical flow from one side to the next must be logical. So you have to say, you don't have to follow a rigid structure, but each one point, one slide must follow on from the next. And this is the red lines. There must be a continuous train of logical thought that goes from your beginning right through to the end of your talk. So now I'm going to kind of go on some examples about what kind of people kind of make mistakes in preparing their slides. And the key question is to keep it really simple. You should not be making more than one argument or kind of logical point per slide. Okay, if you are, I think you find you're making kind of multiple ideas, you're trying to get across more than one piece of information on a slide, you should really think about dividing that up into another slide, even if you're flicking between them, as long as it's not kind of like crazy, going from one slide to the other, to the other, to the other, to the other very rapidly. As long as you're spending enough time for the audience to absorb each point on each slide, you can have more than, you can have a larger number of slides. But really 1 point per slide is a kind of a key message of this. Okay, so you really want to keep the text to a minimum. So this is a fantastic example of why you shouldn't have text on slides. If you have text on slides, people will try and read it. Okay, and they can either be reading the text on your slides or listening to you talk. So as you're this slide out, I'm absolutely sure that some of you are probably trying to read this. And it's really distracting. So don't put too much text on your slides. Try and keep bullet points to an absolute minimum. If you are having bullet points, okay, they're okay for lists of things. Okay, they're not so good for lists of ideas. Okay, if you've got more than one idea on a slide, it should be making up a slide of itself. Okay, so if you are going to have text on slides, it's really got to be kind of at a minimum. It's got to be visible. You've got to be able to, it's got to be, the text has got to be big enough to read. It's got to be in a font that's easy to read, but it can't really distract from the main message of the slide. Okay, so this is an example from what you might have in a kind of a scientific presentation. You've got a title that says this slide is about calcium isotopes in forearms. Okay, that gives us some kind of clue as to what's going on. It's got some imagery over on the left and some text over on the right. So you can see some examples of forearms up here at the top. Says this is maybe what they've measured. There's some graphs here showing some of the results. There's a little equation down the bottom which tells us what calcium isotopes are. And if we then go over and if we're presenting the slide, we might go on to say the things that are written down. So we're going to say them anyway. So what's the point in having them on the slide anyway? You might have seen lots of slides like this in things like in lectures when you're at university, and lecturers do tend to put lots of bullet points on the slides, and that's mostly because those slides will be looked at later by students for revision. Okay, if you're giving a presentation, okay, people aren't going to have your presentation later on to go through and read the text. So there's no need to distract them with the text while you're actually saying it. So the key kind of message of this slide is looking at maybe the top row of this diagram on the left, looking at the variations in calcium isotopes, okay, with changes in temperature, salinity, and carbonate ion. So that's really the key message we're trying to get across. So this is the next of how we might do that slightly better. So first of all, if we look up at the title, I've gone away with a very simple title and added in a more descriptive title that's using more words, which kind of goes against what I'm saying, but that title kind of pretty much describes the point that I'm trying to make. It doesn't describe the image, it doesn't describe what it's about, but it describes the actual point. So it's the key message that I'm trying to get across. So if someone is distracted and all they do is read the title, that's fine because I've got my message across. The other things I've done on the figure is I've done away with the example of forearms and the equation, because if I thought that it was important that people knew what forearms look like, I'd have those on a different slide. I've also simplified the image here. I've done away with one of the examples, so I've taken away some of the data on the slides to focus on just the data that's important for getting my point across, and I've added in a line on the carbonate ion graph over on the right there to highlight the trend in the data. Okay, so you can see more clearly now that there's a definite difference between the two species of forearms over on the left in the temperature diagram. There is a temperature dependence on calcium isotope fractionation, but it's not linear. Salinity has an effect, but it's really not consistent between types of foraminifera, what that effect is. But there is a nice consistent effect, at least for one of the species, between the carbonate ion concentration and calcium isotopes. So that's the point that this slide is trying to get across, is that calcium isotopes is really dependent on temperature and carbonate ion concentration and the species-specific effect between different types of forearms. Okay, so this is another example of where you might want to take a picture from a paper and use it in a presentation. And this is a paper looking at some dating of detrital zircons in some sedimentary and sequences that have been thrusted. Now, that you can see from this diagram, it's very busy. There's an awful amount of text on the diagram that we can't read because it's far too small, and it's not really relevant to our main point. So I'm going to go through about how we might be able to improve a figure like this that we've taken from a paper as part of the talk that we might be giving. What I've done is I've taken away the text at the top of each of these stratigraphic sections, and I've replaced that text with larger text that's just the important thing, so just the name of each section. So previously had the details about the type of section, where it was from, a reference from it. None of that is important. It's just we've now got the names of the sections across the top, so I can refer to those as I describe the slide. The thing I've done is I've highlighted the data that's important. So previously it was actually quite hard to make out where each of the dated samples were from, and all I've done is I've drawn a little red box around where the samples are from and made the text of the data, so the ages of each of these samples, much bigger, so it can be read by people in the audience. Okay. The next thing I've done is I've also taken away text at the bottom. Okay, so because then there's a lot of text down there that wasn't really relevant to what was going on in this slide. So you can use colour, as I've done here. It's really picking out the key parts of the diagram, which are you need to be careful when using colour. Anybody who uses yellow on a white background and expects people to be able to read that are really deluding themselves. So try not to use yellow on a white background. Try not to use dark purple on a black background. You need to think carefully about, does this actually make the thing that I'm trying to say stand out more from the diagram? And the last thing I've done here is I've changed the title, as I've done before, to something more descriptive. Okay, so we can see now that if we were describing this, we could kind of point over to the Alacines syncline over here on the right and say, well, look, you can definitely see that the ages of these are consistently younger than the ages of all the other sections, and you could then go on and describe something about why that's significant or not, whereas previously it was very hard to pick any of that information out from the cluttered slide. Okay, so there was here are some useful things that I found when I was trying to look at how to make a better PowerPoint presentation, and I hope you find these useful. So have a look at some of your presentations, see if any of these kind of comments about too much text, okay, are there images hard to read, see if these things ring true for your presentations, and see if you can improve those. Okay, so thank you for listening to this presentation.